Okay. All right. Well, I think that we're going to get started. Lois already turned on the recording. And I put a link to the guide that we're going to be using today in the chat. And it should be pinned, so even if you came in after I shared it, you should be able to see it. And I can share my screen. All right, one moment. I have 3 screens and I'm always, debating which one I should share. So one moment, please.
Well, now you're just bragging.
I am bragging.
You know I have 2 screens.
Okay.
Nope.
All right. Okay. Is everyone able to see this? It told me that I should be avoiding an infinity screen or something. I'm not sure what that meant. Okay. So I am going to let Jason do the introduction. And I'll flip through the slides while you're going through them, Jason.
Yeah, very good.
Cool.
All right. I hope everybody's well. Thanks for coming out to this lecture. I do know that October is a kind of a wild month in libraries, and so I appreciate everybody coming to kind of talk about this issue of civic engagement in the library and helping people evaluate election information, right? And we've kind of focused it in this. One of the things we're going to do is talk about some generalized issues that we should somewhat be aware of. That'll be kind of maybe what we first handle. The other thing we might be talking about is, of course, some of those resources that might exist as well, and some other places and activities we could potentially do. So right off the bat, my name is Jason Ertz. I'm at the College of DuPage, and I'm the Information Literacy Committee Chair from Little Rock. And my co-presenters, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Katie?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Ediger. I'm the Library Department Chairperson at Truman College, and I'm also on the Information Literacy NILRAC Committee. Hello.
All righty. And I'm Andy Kogel. I'm a librarian down at Lakeland College and the chair of the Professional Development Committee. And this was an opportunity that I think both PDC and InfoLit were exploring at the same time. And as we discovered we had these mutual interests, we thought, hey, you know what? We better do this in October. No better time than right before the election. So we hope that you find it useful. As we go through, we're going to be asking for interaction. We don't want to be just throwing information out. So we are looking for additional resources on top of those that we share as we sail through. So please take advantage of any opportunity to interject, to share in the chat, or we'll be introducing a Padlet shortly as well. So thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you. And to reinforce Andy's point, we will be asking for your feedback. What are tools and exercises and activities you might be using in your libraries to kind of facilitate the civic engagement and make sure the citizens and our community members are using good information to inform their voting. And yeah, well, let's go. Let's get started then. So we're going to present a little bit here of information, and then hopefully we're going to get your input on the matter, and we'll discuss your input as well as we get started. So again, here are our general objectives, right? We're going to looking at this is kind of one of the purposes of this is to kind of bring all our resources together so we can bring it back to our own communities, right? What are we all using that we can bring back to each other to help each other, right? Talking about bias and misinformation and disinformation in general, kind of give a brief overview on that, and really explore how bias can impact civic engagement and how what information people use to vote, right? And that can be a big thing. And then we'll have a discussion with each other and kind of deal with best practices around how do we teach evaluation of information and how do we look at disinformation in the context of elections. So that's kind of what we're going to deal with today as we go forward. So initially, the first thing I kind of want to talk about today is to kind of give a frame around this is the issue of misinformation and bias and disinformation, right? I'm going to kind of assume that everybody has some sense of the differences between misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. I won't kind of go over that again. That's kind of assume that since I'm talking to a room full of librarians, that's what I'm going to assume. But one of the aspects that kind of helps with these issues is these two particular problems that we have. And as we're talking with patrons, as we're teaching classes, as we're out in the community, confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance can rear their ugly heads right off the bat when we're talking to different people. We might see confirmation bias in people's activities, how they kind of look for information. We can see it in that. Cognitive dissonance is a little bit more difficult, and as some things I've been reading about, cognitive dissonance can actually cause a physical pain when the belief is strong, and seeing new facts that kind of contradict those strongly held beliefs can really, in some cases, I've seen some research where physical pain exists, but it really is a mental stress that gets put on us. These are big issues that we have to deal with, and how we deal with them, I think, is up for debate and conversation. And hopefully the conversation that we have today might be around how do we deal with patrons and classes and students' confirmation bias issues, right? Because we all know I can Google anything to agree with me. And that's not a hard thing. And I kind of sometimes will start there when talking with students and dealing with the issue of confirmation bias. Cognitive dissonance is a little bit more difficult to deal with, I think, and sometimes we have the tendency as librarians to just pepper people with correct information, right? Here's the information. This is right. This is from here. This is from here. And that can really cause them to kind of pull back a little bit, right? And kind of deal with this stress that they're kind of feeling as they're kind of looking through the information. So these are two big issues that we have to kind of deal with as we kind of get started. So go ahead, you can go to the next one. So one of the things I kind of stress to people right off the bat in classes and maybe in many cases at the reference desk is that humans are biased naturally. There's no way around this. As long as we're aware of it, I think some kind of self-reflection can help with that. But it is an important thing to remember. Bias is a human trait, and in many cases probably saved our lives countless times through history, right? The lion's attacking you or something. So you have these kinds of biases, which we all know that are generally natural. But one of the other things we have to kind of do is be aware of those biases as we're taking in information. And sometimes I kind of talk with students to help them deal with their own natural biases. We all have them as we're reading and looking through different kinds of information. And hopefully, as they're reflecting on it, they can be a little bit better consumers of information as they're kind of looking through things and determining quality as we're dealing with the broad internet at large. Right, the more you know about your own biases, the better it is, or the less likely it is for you to fall into their own trap. And how do we kind of talk to people about these is something we have to talk about, right? So again, cognitive bias, seeking out our own information, seeking out information that already agrees with what we believe in, right? And cognitive dissonance, the issue of contradictory information, pushing up against what we believe and causing us some kind of distress. I won't get into these very much right now. You can take a look at these links here, the 12 cognitive biases explained and the cognitive bias cheat sheet. You can kind of look at those. I also enjoy like your biases.is. You guys see those posters out there? Those are fun. I got a reference to it in here coming up. But those are good links, and you guys can take a look at these, and we can maybe discuss them as we're discussing other issues. Yeah, so good. So one of the big cognitive biases we're probably going to encounter is the backfire effect, right? And I think this has a lot to do with cognitive dissonance too, in that when something comes at me that I disagree with or just pushing against my core beliefs, I'm going to actually dig in harder on those core beliefs. And I think maybe we all have kind of experienced this probably at a reference interview or in the classroom. I think I've heard a couple of stories about that. So this is a big one. And how do we kind of handle this issue, and how do we kind of maybe prevent the backfire effect when helping people find information? I would love to discuss as a group here as we kind of move along in our discussion. So these are going to be things we want to kind of handle. But this is a real thing that I've been noticing in the psychological literature as an effect on when people see something that oppose what they believed for who knows how long, their whole lives even. That can really be something that they dig in on, because to change those beliefs would be a serious shift in worldviews, a serious shift in identity. When we're going after identity and worldviews around this issue, it can be difficult, and so that's an issue we have to kind of untangle, right? If the beliefs that we're talking about, and there's clear evidence against these beliefs, whatever they may be, flat Earths, I think I saw Ediger's mention, or other types of situations. How do we handle that? Initially might affect the entire conversation, right? If we just start peppering them with pictures of a round Earth, maybe they dig in harder now, right? Because their entire worldview is being changed from this. And the identity is another factor, right? If I'm a huge gun advocate, and this has been my life, if I start providing contrary information to where illegal guns come from, or where, how illegal guns are used, that can be a factor as we kind of go forward here. So backfire effect is one of the big cognitive biases we should be watching for. Okay. Good. Another tool that we might employ as we're kind of looking at other information and talking with patrons is the pre-bunking issue or inoculation problem. I don't know if anybody heard about this before. Van der Linden had written the book Foolproof. Oh, good. Yeah, good. And he talks about this idea of pre-bunking. In fact, Van der Linden actually has created a team of people who created a few games that we'll talk about in a minute around this idea of pre-bunking. And there is some evidence to suggest that if we can get at people before the disinformation kind of fills their head with all this information, it can go a long way to helping us push back on that, right? Oh, good. Yeah, and so pre-bunking, it's how do we kind of help people understand how trolls work, how do people understand how disinformation campaigns work. Once they know these things, and we kind of help them with that information at the front, that healthy skepticism will usually kind of move out into their actual searching behavior, and we might start to see that a little bit. So I do highly recommend this text, as well as some of the information he's provided. So pre-bunking, how do we help them initially, not try to correct what they already believe? Yeah, and that's it. So next, yeah. And then here are some of the games. So these are fun. Some of them are fun. Some of them are kind of a slog, but nonetheless, they don't take a lot of time. Bad News, Harmony Square, and Go Viral all were created by the Van der Linden team. Go Viral, I think, was the first one, and kind of it was dealing with the COVID-19 disinformation problem. Harmony Square, I find particularly fun with students and younger people, because essentially in Harmony Square, you are the troll destroying society, right? That's your job in Harmony Square. And how do you use social media to destroy society and cause rifts and create polarization? And you actually are practicing it. And if you know that that's how it works on the back end, the argument is that it will help you when you're actually seeking your own information on topics. Headlines in high water, I've tried for a little bit, but it's fairly new out of Wisconsin. So that's one to look at. Cranky Uncle's always been fun. If anybody has not played with Cranky Uncle, that could be useful. And the other, Troll Factory and Fake It to Make It. I have not played myself, but I've heard that they can be useful as well. So give a look at these. These might be helpful for some people as we kind of go forward. Even like older folks who maybe don't understand how the trolling system works in social media, right? How do I know, right? How does trolling work? Why is this information? Some people might say, why does this information even come up if it's not real? And a game like Harmony Square is easy to play even for older folks, and it can help them understand how the troll works. And so, yeah. So one of the big ones, and Andy and I and Katie were discussing this, and then really, how do we unpack this argument? I don't trust the government. I do my own research. Right? It's constant. It's a trope. It's the answer to anything that might disagree with them. And so we've been really. I'd actually like to role play this a little bit in another avenue, not today, but because this will be a real one. How do we handle this at the reference desk? I think this is a good question to ask and something for us to kind of really tackle. Some strategies, of course, that we can use is work through their sources themselves, right? If they want to bring in their YouTube nutter to talk about whatever it is they want to talk about, fine, let's put it on the internet. Let's take a look at it and we can take it apart. If that works, great. That might be something that we can work with as well, right? Laterally read the source of information. Who is this YouTuber? Why are they saying this? Where are their sources? Can I find what they're saying in other places, right? These are all things, and I think the illustration that I don't necessarily disbelieve them, but then I'm going to look, can I think lead to some softening of kind of the initial, I don't trust the government answer, right? Like, look, I'm not just outright dismissing you, but I'm not going to let a source like this just stand as it is. I'm going to take it apart. As a professional librarian, this is my job. If you don't like it, then I'm sorry, but this is what we do, right? And this is how I'm not going to dismiss anything outright right away, but I'm going to take it down and look to its sources. Discuss confirmation bias with patrons or classes. That can go a long way too. And cognitive dissonance, those can be good ones. Another thing that I do is I use my own biases, right? So I have a particular bias, and I've always had this bias, and that is that GMO foods are killing us, right? There's no scientific evidence of this, but it's something I cannot let go of, and something that I wrestle with all the time as I'm kind of looking for information on genetically modified foods. And so that's another avenue I kind of use with patrons. And I've used this probably a couple of weeks ago with a patron, like, this is a bias I have, right? This issue. There's no evidence for it, no scientific evidence, but this is the one I'm working through myself. And maybe you're working through some as well. So that can sometimes, if we kind of illustrate that we in fact have our own biases, that it's hard to get over in or out of ourselves, that can maybe help out in our conversations and classroom environments. So that's kind of an overview I want us to kind of think about as we're looking through different pieces of information, right? Cognitive bias, cognitive dissonance, how we talk to patrons about our own biases, and how that can affect the way people look for information and prove information. Now, I think Katie and Andy are going to be talking about some election information sources and how to kind of handle that. So, Katie?
Oh, well, I was going to say, before we move on, Andy put a question on the chat, and I just wanted to know this aloud to everyone. Like, has anyone dealt with this either like in an instruction session or at the reference desk of late? You know, someone who's basically saying like, yeah, I'm just not buying it. Like, I'm going to do my own research on this.
Yeah.
I haven't had it happen recently to me personally, but I have had it happen in a class before.
And please, you can speak your answers.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason to type them. Yeah.
Atticus?
The closest I've had to this was about like 2 weeks ago. There was a student that was doing an argumentative paper on abortion and abortion legislation, and it was more the student having to work through their own thoughts. So the student was self-proclaimed pro-life, but then when the student was describing their stance, they were more like, I'm personally pro-life, but from a legislative stance, there should be. It was more helping the student work through their thoughts, because they were trying to look for pro-life articles and they could not find pro-life articles that were making the arguments they were making, but the pro-choice articles were the ones making the arguments they were making, and that dissonance there was causing the student a large amount of distress, because as they were working through their own thoughts, they were agreeing more and more with articles that they, from a philosophical standpoint, they did not want to agree with.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's a great example.
Where do you feel like you
Like how it ended?
Yeah, like how did the student leave the desk?
Well, the student ended up, because they kept trying to, they almost felt like they were restating it wrong when they were reading through their articles. Like, oh no, maybe it's an issue of I'm not articulating it right. So I was like, okay, let's see what's out there. Let's pull up opposing viewpoints, because that was the database we were in, and seeing the different perspectives, because they needed so many naysayers and so many supporting. And they ended up like, I believe what ended up happening was, and I don't know what their paper ended up looking like on the back end, but they took one of the pro-lifes and one of the pro-choices, and they were like, well, maybe I'll use parts of each as a supporting, and then I'll use parts of each, and like I'll chart my own path. Was kind of the sentiment that the student left with, as opposed to just wholeheartedly taking the argument from any one of the papers. But I don't know, I haven't re-interviewed that student after the fact to see if their worldview has changed as a result, or they just wrote the paper, turned it in, and now they don't have to think about it anymore, which also is a possibility.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, the simple fact that you challenged a student enough that they were actually thinking and had their brain engaged, right? That they actually had a bit of a crisis on their hands trying to figure out their own viewpoint. I'd count that as a win.
Also, I would count it as in the United States, this issue of I can believe what I want, but I don't necessarily need to push it on the rest of us. There's an important distinction to be made in the United States, and I think it sounds like the student had done that based on the literature of which they were watching. Right? You can believe whatever you want, but don't make me believe it. Right? So good. That's great. Yeah. So yeah, our first aspect of sharing. So if you could, for us, everybody, what we want to kind of ask you guys is, do you have any lesson plans, examples, either in document form or web form or whatever they might be, that you could provide that help you talk with students and patrons about disinformation at large, election information. Even if you do talk about, maybe you have lesson plans on confirmation bias or cognitive dissonance, I would love to see those as well, and as they applied it to information seeking. So yeah, anything in the Padlet, we'd love to see. We have a couple of I have an example in there on disinformation discussion. There's a good example in there if you take a look at it. And so we'll take about 2 or 3 minutes. We'd like to hear from you guys. What are some lesson plans you use? What are some other things that you talk about around disinformation in the elections? That could be AI, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But if the lesson plan is AI based, then feel free. So, a couple of minutes. How many? I don't know. How many minutes do you think? Oh, man.
Yeah, and certainly feel free to continue to add to this as we go along. Excellent. We've already got one. Some of the other columns you'll see, especially like the collaboration, we'll be discussing that a little bit further along in the presentation. but please do feel free to share as much as you can. Ultimately, what we want to do is create basically a resource that's available to all of Mill Rock, where we're sharing all these ideas. So, we hope you can find valuable information within them, and also share that valuable content that you've been creating. Let's give it all some legs, if you will.
Yeah, we want to share with each other so that we can all kind of benefit from these things.
For sure. And by all means, if you have something that you've seen that you think is awesome, feel free to share it. It doesn't need to be yours.
Yeah.
As long as the link is public. And I see that someone posted Oakton's guide. I have that one on our LibGuide as well as an example. So yeah, whatever you have that you're open to sharing, please add to it. So thanks, Al, for adding yours.
Oh, nice. Yeah, any LibGuides you might reference that aren't yours, throw in there. It seemed to be a regular librarian practice, right? Kind of harvesting from each other's LibGuides. What else we got? Anybody else?
Oh, anti-racism toolkit. Nice. Under LibGuides there, you scroll down.
Oh, excellent.
Okay, well, we can keep moving our way through the presentation and we can come back here to kind of to see what people have added to this. So thanks everyone who's already put something in. Okay, so I have here, I'm going to kind of flip around between the presentation and the LibGuide. So I tried to kind of organize some things. There's a lot of content out there as far as election materials go. So on this page, I have it sort of divided up between sort of like general election information, library specific information, and then disinformation on voting. So there's a lot of guides that kind of talk about like how to find nonpartisan material, how to see your own ballot ahead of time. I think that that's really important. I'm going to pop over to the guide itself. So I've put things here in kind of different buckets to what seemed to make the most sense at the time. So this section at the top here is misinformation and disinformation education tools that is not specific to elections, right? And then below here, we have tools that are specific to the election. Some of these things are not necessarily, like they're purely informational, right? Like they're not intended to talk about disinformation and misinformation, and some of them are. So, election security, rumor versus reality, the Trusted Info 2024, these are specifically focused on trying to, I think, diffuse thoughts about election fairness, and those are both governmental websites. And then same thing here with the National Association of State Election Directors. I also included a link for Reader Voter Ready, which is like ALA's sort of package of election related materials. So there's like marketing materials there, a lot of different resources. And then there's a ton of great LibGuides. This is just a sampling to kind of give an idea of the different things that are out there. UIUC has a nice LibGuide that kind of talks about like both local as well as wider looking sort of research for elections. This website from the Government Docs Roundtable has a tab for every state, so that I think that that's pretty useful as sort of like a holistic resource. And then I included, shout out to Oakton College. Michelle is representing here, maybe someone else who I don't know, but Oakton has 2 LibGuides that I think are both really helpful. One is voting and voting rights, and the other is specific to the 2024 election. So the voting and voting rights one is sort of like an evergreen site that has information about like where you can go to research information. And the 2024 one is specific to this upcoming election in November. So I just wanted to highlight some of the stuff that's out there. There's a ton of great stuff. I know that following this presentation, I'm planning to put together our own guide at Truman that I will be recycling a lot of content from a lot of these other guides. So good work, everyone who's put together guides already. And let me go back here to the slideshow. Did anyone have any other guides? We can go over to the Padlets. We see Oakton's guide and the anti-racism toolkit. Is there any other guides that folks have seen that they think are really cool, really interesting?
And I'll toss out, even if it's one of the, the Godart one is fantastic. If you haven't looked at that, spend some time in it. If there's one that's already listed, either in the presentation or the LibGuide, but it's one you find particularly valuable, please share that. We've spent some time exploring, but maybe not fully engaging with all of them yet. So those ones that you think are just the best, please either shout that in the messaging system here, or feel free to speak up at any time.
Okay. Cool. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Andy now.
Okay, so we rode this issue in the last election, of course. And as we can expect, and as we all already know, it's only evolved and gotten more sophisticated and more dangerous. But looking at the impact of AI on the election and disinformation that's being shared, and the challenges that come along with the more sophisticated, disinformation that we're seeing shared, and how hard it is, as we've talked about with Jason explaining and talking about cognitive dissonance and our biases and our desire to be right. It just is so reinforcing. So we wanted to put together at least a handful of resources. And this is, again, where we could definitely use the power of our group and our organization to share additional resources. But we wanted to pull together some that we've already identified. And of course, they're continually springing up day after day. So I'm trying to check every day what is being produced by some of those go-to sources. And of course, here you can see we've linked to both the Brennan Center for Justice. They have a pretty nice big catalog of different articles and resources available to you. That first link will take you there. And take some time exploring that if you haven't yet. Some quality information is available. One that I just ran across this past week is from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, which honestly I haven't spent a lot of time with. But Grok AI is the integrated AI system within Twitter or X. And they have a report available on their site that's really interesting. It's well done. But they basically had researchers go in and document their prompts and their queries as they were throwing them at the AI, and it boiled down to there are basically no guardrails. So it would accept many of the initial prompts, which was bad enough, but then they were also allowed, they were able to jailbreak those. They were able to continue to modify them and ultimately produce some digital fakes. And they illustrate many of those within that report. But it's interesting that in their detailed information, they share the prompts that were used, how they attacked it, how they did it, and basically just exposed, not just Grok, but many AI platforms for the ability and the ease through which election disinformation and hate can be generated and shared. So it's definitely worth having a look at if you haven't seen that yet or really explored it. And it's very recent. Most of their election information, I think it was just done in the last few months here and released recently. And of course, Brookings as well. They have released a really interesting short article on AI memes and how memes are basically becoming the way through which election information is being disseminated, for better or worse. So there's continually more things pouring out, and sometimes it just feels so difficult to try and stay on top of not only the disinformation that's coming out, but the resources available to safeguard against it. So we can step on to the next slide. We of course will be sharing these, so you'll have those links available to you. But as far as voting specific and voting resources, News Literacy Project, which I'm sure many of us have used. If you haven't, absolutely jump in there. There's a wealth of information available to you on AI, but they're massive on misinformation. And they have an Election 2024 dashboard that's easy to navigate, that's user-friendly, and one that we share a lot with community groups and different organizations. It's very accessible to a general audience, which is really good. Not one, no, there we go. And the Brennan Center, they have produced their own election kind of stopping point and have loaded it with a number of different articles and analyses that you can scroll through. So there is a wealth. And again, at times it can be overwhelming. So that's where we, again, kind of keep emphasizing again, if there's one that you really like, and that's what has been just an absolute pleasure in working with Jason and Katie on this project, is that we'll just be tossing out the ones we really like to each other and discover quite a bit of great stuff. So there's a couple more Brennan Centers in there. And then the last one there, United States Election Assistance Commission. This is really geared towards election workers and poll workers, but there's a really interesting guide that they released. They call it a toolkit, but there's a guide in there that basically outlines some of the issues that their election workers are going to have to be dealing with, pointing out things such as election sites do not have social media, how all these types of things. Ways to go back, like we were talking about earlier with lateral reading and exploring and pausing and thinking, wait a minute, there's no such thing as a social media site for this election, location. So there's a lot of interesting tools and resources available within it too. So there's a lot out there. We would love to compile and add more to it. So anything that you've used or seen, please share it with us and take some time to explore these as well and share them as you see fit. But definitely, there's a lot out there. There's a lot to try and digest, and the new information is rolling out so quickly. It's just so hard to keep on top of on both sides from the disinformation standpoint and our debunking and safeguarding side. So yeah, definitely take a look at those. So we can move on to the next one as well here. So the last column there, and I saw Atticus share an item in the Padlet, and please, if you have anything, please go ahead and jump in there. As we were working through this project, one of the things that first dawned on me is we come from very different institutions and different demographically, geographically, and so on and so forth. Lakeland is largely a rural district, and we cover some 4,000 square miles in many rural communities. And that means that we have a lot of people in our district who don't have access to a lot of the tools and resources we've been discussing. If you're in a larger area, suburban area, you have more better funded libraries and more schools there to help disseminate information. So Sarah and I have been had discovered the desire and the appetite for information on both AI and on misinformation, disinformation, especially as we're nearing the election. So as we started putting out our feelers to public libraries primarily, we discovered that, we discovered that appetite. We were invited in. And then as we talked with our audiences, we discovered, surprise, surprise, they're members of other community organizations. And they were telling us, boy, it would be great if my, this group or my church group or whoever, if they could hear it as well. So we've been opening this up, and we've seen an incredible surge in the desire to have this information presented in some way. So as you can see, what started with the public libraries has evolved into Rotary and Kiwanis exchange clubs. We'll be talking with a church coming up in January. Right after this presentation, I'm hopping in the car and going to talk to the Coles County Retired Teachers Association. And then on top of all that, the Regional Office of Education down here in Charleston has also been thrilled to have us come in to present on both of these topics as well, because K-12 is desperately looking for opportunities to do some professional development on the topics as well. So there is a huge appetite out there. And it's interesting to see how the community college library can kind of fill a need and a role within there. So we'd love to hear more, and I'm very curious to know how many folks are collaborating outside of your campus community. One of the challenges with it, of course, is as I had expressed it in one of our meetings, is that on campus we carry a level of authority as librarians, as faculty members, as instructors, and we have a captive audience. So the environment gives us a certain security blanket, but once you step away from campus and into the community, you start to wonder, oh, how am I going to be challenged? What might happen? And I can tell you through my own experience thus far, it's just been fantastic. But you do have, I've experienced kind of very gentle pushback in some of those areas of, the cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias. And my primary go-to has been reinforcing elements of lateral reading. And for the most part, people have taken that up and they've said, yeah, okay, I can get behind that. The concept of don't trust a single source. And they'll come and they'll say that, well, I read on this site, I read this. And you can say, okay, but where else have you heard it? And then you get a little bit of a pause. And I said, well, go and research it. So it's a slightly different audience, but they're out there and they're craving the information as well. So, and I can see that Atticus, you've done some presentations as well, and that's starting to grow. And I know Jason had gone out and visited an assisted living facility up there at COD. So explore these opportunities if you have the ability and the time. It is definitely something to explore, and something that we feel is vital to the mission of our institution is engaging the community beyond the campus. Okay. And there we go. So another, just a prompt back to the Padlet there. And I did see another one pop in there.
I just pinned the Padlet so that anyone who joined after can still access that. So it's the same link.
Oh, thank you. MVCC did several podcasts on disinformation. Oh, nice. Please also search fake news. Yeah. Have the how have the podcasts gone over? I don't know who's on the call that tossed that in. My apologies.
Moraine Valley, yeah.
Yeah.
Sam. So
Oh, yeah, I'm not involved in the podcasting. I'm just aware of it. So just sharing the information. So
Cool.
yeah.
yeah, if anybody has any more collaborative elements they want to put into the Padlet, any other LibGuides or lesson plans. Anybody do a display, right? If you have a physical
right.
display at your library, we'd like to see what that looks like, just so everybody can have kind of examples and other places to look for information.
And I'll also just add, I didn't add anything for Truman College for the collaboration section, in part because like this is something that we really haven't done as a community college. Like we haven't done a lot of outreach with outside organizations until recently. Just like anyone who wasn't a student, faculty, or staff member getting into the building or into the library was a huge issue. So I think this is something that I'm interested in exploring, but it's good to hear some ideas of what other folks have done.
Atticus, that's pretty cool. So you guys spoke with NPR on the topic.
Yeah, WVIK, the Quad Cities, radio, local radio. They had me come in when when the public library thing got put on their calendar, then that must have put it on WVIK's radar. So I talked to them.
That's really cool. So has anybody else done any, TV, radio, any outreach in that regard? We might have to take a stab at that, see what happens. See if we can get anybody to listen to us.
Yeah, well, one thing you should check on is your community colleges. Kind of some community colleges, we have one here. They have a speakers bureau or an experts list, and then a lot of news organizations within your area or a lot of other churches and other groups can go to the community college and check out the speakers bureau, check out experts that they can interview with their program. So see if there's some kind of promotional element in there for your libraries and your librarians, really. And one of the things I'd like to see is more librarians getting out into the public, doing news shows, doing radio shows, whatever it might be, as kind of experts in dealing with this particular situation. I don't see a lot of that, but I think that would be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious. Is there anything amongst everyone on the session here? Are there any topics that you're kind of expecting that you haven't seen? Any questions or anything outstanding that you're going to leave going like, oh, well, they didn't answer this? See, I assume that we're just so amazing that there's,
For me, hi, I'm Kat.
Hey, Kat.
For me, there's just a lot of I've saved the LibGuide. I'm gonna go through a bit more. I want to dig into some of these resources that were shared. Some of them I know, some of them I don't. So I just I'm like, oh, this is some great stuff to dig into and to have ready that I can just pull up and share if there is a question. I mean, I might even share because right now our tutor have the connection of one of our tutors is actually part of the local League of Women Voters in Illinois. So I might share this oh, we have this might be useful to you. So yeah, just a lot of processing. And also for me just personally, I was kind of in and out because I'm the only one in at the desk right now. So I had to be kind of there's a question, I had to go run and answer it. But it was great. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and we should highlight too, the American Library Association and the League of Women Voters have a kind of they've teamed up for voting purposes. So you see a lot of material on that. That would be important.
And one of the components of, again, what we're trying to do is take a single presentation on a single date and create a toolkit out of it so that we can continue to build this. So naturally we invite any type of additional feedback, information, resource ideas, things that might pop up that are brand new or undiscovered. Let's share it. Let's share it across NILROC and see what we can build together. I did, and I don't mean to jump ahead here by any means, but in the chat I placed a link to a feedback form that the Professional Development Committee uses to kind of review and evaluate our presentations. So we'd appreciate it if you have time to grab that link and fill it out, or follow up with it a little bit later in the day whenever you might have a chance.
Yeah, so if you guys want, if there aren't any more things to put into Padlet, but feel free to continue to do that. What are some other things you guys are noticing at your libraries around this particular issue of voting and disinformation? Maybe sometimes we see a lot of like, I was told to vote here, but that's not where I go. Those kinds of problems too. So anybody out there, please.
I'll add one thing that I forgot to mention earlier. We have a link to the ACRL toolbox, as well as a few lesson plans examples. So those are all on the LibGuide, but the ACRL sandbox is always a good place to check out if you are looking for example lesson plans. So we've included a couple on evaluating information, and there's one that I just added on voting research. So, you know, it can be a starting point. Sometimes what you find is not, you know, a perfect fit for what you're looking to do, but it's, you know, it can be kind of a good place to start.
And think about how when we talk to patrons, that's a big one, or our students, is how do we reinforce their worldview, but still question some sources of information that they're using, right? That's kind of a softening of the blow, for lack of a better way to describe it. But I think that's one of the things we're dealing, because when that dissonance hits, or you know, they find something they already agree with, how do we not dismiss their identity entirely, but still talk about the sources of which they're using here? How do we separate those two things? Might be an important practice. And I'm hoping to actually do a kind of a what do we call it? Like an kind of a scenario where we get somebody to kind of keep coming back with, I don't trust the government. I don't, you know, I do my own research issues. I'd really like to role play that a little bit. And hopefully that's going to be maybe what we do in Informational Literacy Committee. So
there you go.
That would be a good one.
Yeah. You know, it is fascinating that, you know, there's always been a need for it, but it feels more vital now than ever to kind of continue on Jason's theme. There is just the concept of civil discourse. You know, I've been talking with our DIB coordinator on that topic of just how can we discuss challenging topics. You know, that's the purpose of higher education, is to explore, to open our mind, and to be flexible, and not necessarily have to agree or accept, but at least be civilized back and forth. And it just feels like now more than ever, we're at that point where we desperately need it. And I think people are looking to understand and figure out how to do that, and find that, you know, literally a safe space in which they can talk about ideas and learn how to react without the world falling apart, you know. So it's an interesting time, you know, a challenging time for sure, especially for information specialists, right? Oh.
Did anyone have any questions, comments before we end our session today? And thanks for folks who've already put stuff in the chat.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to see this conversation extended and carried on and pushed further down the road within Mill Rock, and we look forward to those types of opportunities where we can continue to share. If you do see something, please share it out on the list or get it out there. We'll keep kicking it along. And yeah, Caitlin, we will. Of course, the link to the LibGuide is in the
Right
chat
there.
messages. Oh, and she shared it again. But
Yeah.
I think we will follow up with a email to the listserv with links to both the presentation and the research guide, so that you have all those links and resources at your fingertips. And, you know, feel free to respond to it as well. We would really like to have the conversation larger and with more people. We had a great time, the three of us, working through this. And I'm sure it would have been fantastic with, that many more folks. So.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you all.
All
Thank
right.
Have a great day.
Have a great day. Thanks.
Thanks, Jason and Katie. You guys were
Yeah.
fantastic. Loved it.